This is the Troubles podcast, a podcast which explores the violence and bloodshed that occurred in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain, as multiple sides and organisations waged a bloody conflict over the status of Northern Ireland. Hi folks, this week's episode is going to be a bit different from the usual ones. I'm writing this in August 2024, and in the early days of this month there has been unrest and disruption in the Northern Irish city of Belfast. Violence like this we haven't seen the likes of since 2021. Back then, that violence came after the Northern Irish authorities announced that they would not prosecute members of Sinn Féin after they broke coronavirus restrictions to attend the funeral of Bobby Storey, who was a senior figure in the IRA. He played a pivotal role in the 1983 Maze prison escape. His funeral drew in a crowd of between 1,500 to 2,000 people, including Gerry Adams and Sinn Féin's leader in the Republic of Ireland, Mary Lou MacDonald, and the current First Minister of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill. Michelle O'Neill was the one who had essentially set the COVID rules and regulations, and then she was seen to have openly flaunting them by attending this funeral. The decision not to take any action against these nationalist figures, ignoring COVID regulations, deeply upset some members of the Loyalist community, who had cancelled their July 12th celebrations. Michelle O'Neill initially doubled down, stating that the guidelines were not clear, but she eventually issued a full apology for taking part in the funeral.
I wish to again say it today and to put on the public record that I am truly sorry for the hurt that has been caused to so many families who have lost a loved one during this time. My attendance at the funeral of Bobby Storey was to support a family during their grief as he was laid to rest. Over the past 9 months, I have worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and confidence with the public as a result of undermining the public health message. I am truly sorry that my actions have contributed to the grief or the heartache that has been felt and experienced by many people who've lost a loved one during this pandemic. That was never, ever my intention. And for that, I offer my heartfelt and unreserved apology to those families that have lost a loved one. I take very seriously my responsibility as a public office holder and as Deputy First Minister and Joint Head of Government. The events of that day were investigated by the police, with whom I gave, as you would expect, my full cooperation. The report published on the 30th of March by the PPS set out its judgment, which was made independently and impartially by the team of senior prosecutors assisted by senior counsel. I now understand a review of that judgment has now been requested, and I'll await the outcome of that. Nevertheless, it is unfortunate that this matter has divided the Executive and the Assembly that many of us worked so hard to bring about and to restore in order to get on with delivering public services to the public to whom we serve.
So then, when it was announced on March 30th, 2021 that there would be no action taken against those in attendance of the funeral, violence broke out in a number of places in Northern Ireland, including Derry, Ballymena and parts of Belfast. But the COVID issue wasn't the only reason that this violence spilled over. This also came around the time of Brexit and the Northern Irish Protocol, and complications surrounding the Northern Irish sea border. The Northern Irish Protocol aimed to eliminate the need for border controls between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland by creating a de facto border down the Irish Sea for goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. These would then be subjected to EU checks. With this de facto border, many Northern Irish Unionists felt that they were being cut off from the rest of the United Kingdom. There was anger and a sense of betrayal amongst many in the Unionist community. To add to that, the police had had a number of successes against drug gangs and criminal activity, which had supposedly been run by Loyalist gangs. It is believed that these elements allowed the pressure to build, which just needed a spark to ignite the flame. That spark was the decision not to prosecute any of the thousands of nationalists who had attended Bobby Storey's funeral. This led to the outbreak of violence, which saw gangs of youths attacking buildings, throwing petrol bombs, and in one case, hijacking a bus and setting it alight. At least 74 police officers were injured, and upwards of 600 officers were deployed onto the streets, wearing riot gear and using water cannons to disperse the crowd. In the first few days of the violence, it was primarily those from Loyalist backgrounds who were carrying out the rioting. But as the days progressed, there were eventually clashes between Loyalist and Republican youths along a number of peace lines in Belfast. It was reported at the time that a number of older individuals were seen encouraging and egging on the youths, and the PSNI did eventually state that they believed that there was an element of organisation to the rioting. After a number of days, some groups representing Loyalists began speaking up and talking to those rioting in their communities, calling for an end to the rioting. This is an important point which will be relevant later in this episode. Overall, the violence didn't appear to be orchestrated by any specific Loyalist paramilitary groups, but Loyalist youths did listen to them when they asked them to stop. That, or the riots simply lost their steam. Okay, that was 3 years ago, so what about today? Where are we now? In 2023, the Windsor Framework was introduced, which adjusted the Northern Irish Protocol in the hope to find a middle ground between the European Union and the United Kingdom. This was accepted by both Unionists and Nationalists in Northern Ireland, though some Unionists were still cagey and many in the DUP outrightly opposed it. The Windsor Framework is not incredibly relevant to this episode and what is happening in 2024, but it all does inform a greater story. Loyalists in Northern Ireland aren't particularly happy at the state of affairs. So the spark which ignited the violence which has been going on in August 2024 took place in the seaside town of Southport in England on July 29, 2024. A number of adults and 25 children were attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance party at a yoga studio in town. It was a yoga, dance and bracelet-making workshop, themed around the music of Taylor Swift. At 11:45, a 17-year-old arrived at the studio after taking a taxi there. Armed with a knife, he walked into the venue and began stabbing the adults and children in attendance. 3 children were killed in the attack. 6-year-old BB King and 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe died at the scene. The third child, 9-year-old Alice de Silva Aguirre, died in the hospital the following day. In total, 9 children and 2 adults were treated for injuries, with many being critical. This has been one of the worst attacks against children in the United Kingdom that has occurred in decades. At the time of the attack, the attacker was 17 years old, and this would allow him a certain degree of anonymity. But his identity was soon revealed by the UK police for reasons I'll get into soon. The attacker was 17-year-old Axel Muganwa Ruda Kubaner, who is a British citizen born in Cardiff, Wales in 2006. I've also seen it reported that he was diagnosed with autism and had reportedly been, quote, unwilling to leave the house and communicate with family for a period of time. His parents were originally from Rwanda and moved to the UK after the Rwandan genocide. Rwanda is a predominantly Christian country. As of writing, the case is ongoing, so I won't say any more about this individual. But police announced on July 29th that they are not treating this as a terror-related attack. In the immediate aftermath of this attack, false information began to spread rapidly about the attacker. It's believed that this information was spread by far-right and anti-immigration groups. Claims began spreading online that the attacker was a Muslim asylum seeker who had recently arrived in the UK in a small boat. This was the reason the police ended up announcing the attacker's identity, to quash these claims. This false narrative was enough to ignite the tensions which had been bubbling over for the past few years in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, attended the scene of the crime and laid flowers, and he was heckled by irate members in the crowd.
How many more children have died on our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? We're going to do something.
Time to change, Starmer.
Come on, needed. How many more children? Is it mine next?
We're going to stand up for our children. React.
Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister.
Get something.
Make a real change! Get our children! Go away!
I just found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter was killed.
You're not wanted!
Scumbag! The person I've held as a child and he's
Who said it was for Who was it?
He's meant to be the Prime Minister. I'm gonna stop stepping inside.
One day after this attack on July 30th, hundreds of protesters gathered around a mosque in Southport chanting "No surrender" and "English till I die." They then chanted the name of Tommy Robinson, who was the founder of the English Defence League. Tommy Robinson is a staunch anti-Islam campaigner and a prominent far-right politician in the UK. As the evening descended, things turned more violent, with items being thrown and a police van set on fire. Over 50 police officers were injured. This anti-Islam violence continued to spread around the UK, primarily focused on mosques, Islamic centres, or places which had been used for housing migrants and asylum seekers. The protests were usually composed of a couple of hundred people, and in some cases around 1,000. In many cases, the anti-immigration and anti-Islam groups were often met by anti-racism groups. By August the 3rd, the protests reached Belfast. The focal point of the protesting in Northern Ireland was Belfast's City Hall, and two groups of protesters emerged. Journalist Alison Morris described one side as being composed of politicians, trade unionists, refugee support groups and members of the public. Then on the other side were far-right agitators, and there were also people who showed up expecting a peaceful protest opposing immigration. A far-right group from the Republic of Ireland called Coolock Says No also attended the protest. Coolock is a suburban area on the north side of Dublin, and there was a site on this area which had been earmarked as a place to house asylum seekers. Protesters had been camped out at this site since March, protesting against the use of the site. Things escalated in July as a number of fires broke out on the site. These proposed immigration centres are quite a topical issue around Ireland at the moment. Once word gets out that a building is earmarked to house asylum seekers, it becomes a target for the far right, and many buildings have been burnt in Ireland throughout 2024. Immigration is something which definitely needs to be better addressed in Ireland. Some of these proposed asylum centres were due to be set up in towns and villages around Ireland, with little to no consultation from the residents. Many hotels have also been closed to refugees, which has been very beneficial to the hotels, but quite damaging to the pubs and restaurants in the town they are meant to serve. Burning buildings is proving to be an effective deterrent though, and the Gardaí are having difficulty finding the perpetrators. Anyway, back to the day of the protest outside City Hall in Belfast. It was a really bizarre scene, with Irish tricolour flags and Union Jack flags flying side by side, as members of the far-right movements portrayed an image of cross-border unity against immigration. Some of the protesters in Northern Ireland were linked to loyalist groups who would have opposed all things Irish, so to see the two standing together against immigration was indeed strange. The old adage comes to my head, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It should be noted, and this is a very important point, that not all of the anti-immigration protesters were violent, but the violent protesters were the loudest and essentially hijacked the protest. The protest started at Belfast City Hall and then made its way onto the Belfast Islamic Centre, but the group seemed to have trouble finding the centre and went down the wrong road, Botanic Avenue. They then began smashing shop windows and causing damage to the buildings in the area. The police service had City Hall protected and then allowed the illegal protest to pass through the city, as they'd also protected the Belfast Islamic Centre. But they couldn't protect the various businesses who were targeted, and one supermarket was attacked. The supermarket was owned by a Syrian refugee and was completely destroyed in the attack, and harrowing footage was played the next day on Irish media, showing a very upset owner sitting outside the remains of his shop.
Too many things happened. That's what's happened. Well, you can say there is nothing. It's all dead. Nothing left. Some ashes only. People attacked this place. Racism against Islam and Muslims, especially Muslim community. All of that happened and the police did nothing. I'm telling you the truth. What kind of police? Letting the people to burn everything down. I don't know where is the safety in that, but this is all rubbish.
It was a sad day for many in Belfast, who would vehemently oppose this sort of violent racism, who had targeted businesses owned by migrants who had worked hard in this area for many years. The evening then took a bit of a bizarre turn, which saw some of the members of the Irish far-right group, Coolock Says No, at a pub in the Sandy Row area of Belfast. Sandy Row is a staunchly loyalist part of Belfast, and some of the Coolock Says No members were hosted by a prominent loyalist who in the past had been questioned as part of a loyalist attack during the Troubles, the Sean Graham bookmakers shooting, which saw 5 Catholics killed. This did a lot of damage to their reputation amongst people who had supported them in the Republic of Ireland. Here's a poem that was doing the rounds on social media in the wake of the news of their appearance in Sandy Row. It looks like it was written by Northern Irish nationalists. "O Coolock, Coolock, what have you done? You sold your soul for a day in the sun. You came to Belfast and spent the day with the UVF and the UDA. At our city hall you looked so gleeful as you stood with the Huns that murdered our people. We never thought friends from Dublin town would come to Belfast and let us down, standing proudly at the front of the pack as their buddies were waving the Union Jack. Holding their banner, Coolock Says No, and drinking with bastards in Sandy Row. They're the same people who showed you no pity when they let off their bombs in your fair city. 27 people they killed in one day, but now you believe it was okay. The ghosts of the slain are looking down at what you done in Belfast town. Go back to Dublin and don't come back, and don't forget your Union Jack. We'll always remember Coolock's role when you came to Belfast and sold your soul." On August the 5th, there was an anti-immigration protest outside the Gardaí headquarters in the Phoenix Park in Dublin. It was a small gathering, but when the group saw the Coolock Says No banner unfurled, the crowd grew irate and demanded that the group leave. Here's the audio of the altercation.
Yup. Coolock Says No. Right, you bastards. Oh. No, you can't only get go.
Get that fucking thing out of here. No, get the fucking thing out of here because that was
Because we're being called loyalists because of that. Non-loyalists. Look, the banner's not welcome here.
fucking Lord here with you. See this? That shouldn't be where the fucking British flag is shouldn't. No, we won't. Shouldn't be where the British flag is. That's why you get that out of here. Have you forget the fucking heat? Have you forget the heat? Don't you want that out? Don't be shouting in my face. I'm a be respectful. Stop it. The banner's not welcome here. The banner's not welcome here. The banner's not welcome here. I'd rather you respect the people that organise that and put the banner away. We're fucking loyalists here. We don't get called loyalists here. We're fucking loyalists. We don't forget our history. Walk right into that fucking house. Yeah, you're walking right into the house. Yeah, no. It's fucking here. These are 100%. These are 100%.
More going on.
Back in Belfast, the violence continued for a number of days, and as of writing it seems to have petered out. Alison Morris reports that usually community workers representing factions of loyalism would call on their community to ease off on the violence, like I talked about in 2021. But in this case, when requested, they denied any involvement and said they can't do anything. Morris went on to posit that the Sandy Row UDA have gone rogue and are operating completely independently of any other loyalist group, perhaps focusing the entirety of their efforts against Islam. The UVF also scrubbed their hands of these protests, saying it has nothing to do with them. Quote, "We didn't start it, we're not stopping it." So that's basically it really. A tragic killing in England led to a campaign of misinformation, which caused days of rioting in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But I guess this doesn't come as a complete surprise. The same thing happened in Dublin back in 2023. In response to a man attacking a group of children with a knife, there was a night of chaos on O'Connell Street, with around 200 anti-immigration protesters damaging and looting a number of buildings. Seeds of division have taken root in Ireland, the UK and around the world, and these far-right and anti-immigration groups have indeed amassed a following. People are angry and misinformation is rife. It's believed that in the week of the rioting in the wake of the stabbings at Southport, the Russian government contributed to the spread of misinformation. Journalist Fiona Meredith published an article in the Belfast Telegraph recently, which appeared to address some misconceptions regarding misinformation. It also made sure to clarify that the issues with the people of Northern Ireland with the government cannot be focused solely on immigrants. Quote, "Is the shortage of good, affordable housing in some parts of Northern Ireland the fault of immigrants, refugees or asylum seekers? No. Is the fact that health waiting lists are hideously long and it's increasingly difficult to see a GP or doctor when you need one the fault of immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers? No. If some schools are too packed to provide a place for pupils who require one, is that the fault of immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers? No. Are immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers responsible for an increase in crime, which is relatively low here anyway? No. Most pertinently, after the horrifying and disgraceful events of the past week, are you having a debate about immigration if you attack a business run by someone not originally born here, or attack police trying to protect a place of worship? Absolutely not. That is just racism and thuggery. It's not a debate in any way whatsoever. This is, in many ways, a good place to live. Obviously, it has many well-documented problems too. Okay, back to me. I thought it would be interesting to bring up the actual stats related to immigration in Northern Ireland. Data from the Home Office shows a total of 2,248 asylum seekers were in receipt of support in Northern Ireland as of the 31st of March 2024. So I guess the question is, how true are these concerns related to immigration? And who is the one stoking the flames? That brings us to the end of this week's episode. This episode is an extremely simple and basic insight into the past 2 weeks, but there is a lot more to it. I would encourage you to listen to the Beltell podcast for more information as it's happening. And if you want boots on the ground reporting live from the scene in Northern Ireland, check out Northern Irish photographer Kevin Scott, aka KScott94 on Twitter. That's it from me. Thanks, and see you next time. I'm delighted to announce that the Troubles podcast is returning to the United Kingdom's favourite true crime podcast convention, CrimeCon 2024. Taking place in London on the 21st and 22nd of September, this is a 2-day event dedicated to all things true crime. I attended a couple of years ago and met my first fan in real life. He was a man by the name of Wilfred, so it's a pleasure to be returning again. So please do come along, it would be great to meet more fans. You can get tickets at crimecon.co.uk and quote Troubles to get a 10% discount. I'll see you there.